Hello and welcome to a new episode of Good Morning L&D, your wake-up call to really revolutionize the future of learning and development. And you might hear it already, I'm a little bit nervous today because the guest we brought in today is a guest I've been literally dreaming of, because she is really one of the true thought leaders globally when it comes to designing and shaping the future of learning and development. She's, I think one of the learning professionals I know who really made learning a competitive advantage to the company, really core to the business strategy. And she's here today to share about her experience and what this actually really means for the company. So please welcome with me Heather Stefanski, the Chief Learning Officer and the lead of the People, Data and Analytics team of McKinsey. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you. So nice to be here, Moritz. I appreciate the invitation and getting to talk to a slightly different audience, getting some folks in Europe that I don't normally get a chance to speak with. So it's awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. So really, we're super happy and thankful to have you and that you made it possible. Really appreciate it. And I mean, just to get a sense of your career, I think you've been, a long time with McKinsey. You've been working also on the kind of, consultant side of things. And when I was reading, your kind of story, I was wondering, when was the moment when you realized this whole learning and organization topic is your favorite one?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think I've always had sort of a passion around development. Even when I was very young in my career, I was back at Stanford Business School, and I decided that I'd also get a master's in education at Stanford. So I always had a bit of an inclination that I was interested in development. And even when I was doing client work, what I got most excited about in my client work was when I saw people that were part of my client teams get promoted, right? I helped to support them sort of on their individual development journey. And I sort of take it from, at the very beginning of my career where I was supporting individuals in their own growth and development to then supporting teams of people in their growth and development. Organizations of folks. And now I feel like I get a chance to both support an organization at McKinsey where, part of our mission and purpose is to develop exceptional talent, which we get recognized in the market. So we are ranked again by Time Magazine as the #1 place for future leaders. And I get a chance to help other organizations shape how they're thinking about the growth and development of their people. And so I think it's been a bit of a journey for me, starting from what I got most excited about early in my career, which was one individual's development, to saying, how can I then scale that to, basically have an impact on the world?
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, scaling that, I think you have a team of 400 learning professionals globally doing this together with you. And you said the journey, and I immediately thought about the journey also of learning, right? How learning has also evolved in this time span, I guess. And this is something I would really love to explore, because learning is changing. The role of learning is changing in a way, but it's not changing due to any trends, because business needs it to change, right? And I would really get started here, right? Because I so often see, learning professionals and learning leaders to, jump on the next trend because of the next trend. and I always say, wait a minute, why, right? What is changing in the company? What is this next chapter of transformation of your company? And how can learning support this maybe in a more impactful way, and what needs to change for that? So going to that square one, what's happening at McKinsey right now? How's the business changing? What are the key challenges? And please fill us in.
Yeah. So I don't think our key challenges are that different from others, in the sense that, we're seeing the half-life of a skill, significantly decrease, right? We're seeing a need for faster learning. If you think about what McKinsey needs to do, McKinsey needs to advise corporations on their most challenging business problems, right? And we got to stay ahead of what's happening in those companies. And so if you think of the pace of AI and how fast that's moving, and then you also add to that sort of a set of human skills that are even more important than ever before around relationship building, around judgment, around understanding risk, around resiliency, around learning agility, there's this need to move faster than ever before. And if we think of ourselves as learning or training practitioners, where we're building learning curriculum, there's no way you can keep pace. If we instead think of ourselves as development practitioners, and really what we're doing is about capability building and development, and we think about building development ecosystems to support an even faster pace of change and upskilling than ever before, that's the sort of move that we certainly have pivoted in McKinsey, and we're seeing, other leading learning and development organizations starting to take that pivot as well. Because again, you just can't keep pace with the business needs if you're just delivering training programs.
When I was preparing our session, I loved the numbers you put to this, right? You said, well, 80% of the learning happens in the flow of work, but 80% of the time of an average L&D team is spent on these 10% of formal learning. And how can we, flip this around? And I think you already gave us the answer, right? We're moving on from building trainings to becoming those architects of the development ecosystem. How? How did you do it, right? Because I guess also at McKinsey there have been, tons of trainings and so on. And how did you move on from there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say one of the advantages of McKinsey, again, is that our whole we already are geared to be a development organization, right? So we think about both performance and people, and we recognize the value of kind of the notion that these two things need to come together, right? So that's really helpful. But maybe it's helpful if I just lay out an example of a particular place or skill and kind of what that means, right? And so we talk about using, an entire influence model. That's another thing we think about. So role modeling behaviors, we talk about upskilling, we talk about incentives, we talk about the right story for change. So for example, coming out of COVID, we had a real push to sort of drive feedback and apprenticeship, right? And yes, the learning practitioners and us were at the center of it because, again, we're focused around development. But we did a number of things. Yes, we built out some other training programs to help build feedback skills, and we even built them in very new ways, right? We used simulations where you could actually watch somebody's skills develop over time in how we taught feedback, right? So we taught it in a lot of new ways. But that was a very small part about the change. We also thought about what needs to happen in our performance management systems. How are we rewarding and emphasizing feedback? How can we create change champions and leaders to demonstrate the importance of feedback? So we actually ran something called the Way We Work Awards, which are awards about a set of practices we have that support feedback. And so those include a kickoff ritual where you're kicking off your engagement, where you say, I'm kicking this project off and let's talk about our development needs. We have a ritual around one-on-ones, which are individual feedback. We have a ritual around team feedback. And then at the end of the engagement, we have formal assessment of skills where you get formal feedback, right? So we actually, we're building into the way we work set of things that are going to support feedback, right? Our performance reviews are valuing feedback and apprenticeship. And they actually ask the question, who are you developing? Who are you supporting on your journey? So this is what I mean by sort of leaning into that development ecosystem. It's not just about I'm building learning programs, but how am I actually fundamentally changing the way we work to support the development of those skills?
Yeah, I really love this holistic approach. I also, by the way, love this influence model. I think it's super helpful, right? To really see, habit change or behavior change at scale, from a systemic point of view. And I also love, by the way, this idea of making small pieces out of it, like with rituals, habits. It's, I think, easier to adapt for an organization to it. And I think you didn't stop there, right? And I want to, push a little bit towards, AI coming out into this whole game as a kind of accelerator. At least that's what I got from, reading and listening to your work, where AI can suddenly, enable learning in a flow of work which hasn't been possible maybe in this way before, right? Because you had to pause work to learn. and now suddenly this is somehow interlinked. Can you a little bit fill us in here how also all your kind of efforts towards this kind of development ecosystem have maybe even accelerated also with AI.
Yeah. So I guess a couple of things. So one is fundamentally that like the building blocks, part of the building blocks of a development ecosystem is what we describe as an apprenticeship culture, where you're actually learning in the flow of work. And again, in the past, a lot of it has been through humans, right?
Yeah.
But this notion that you have this culture of learning and teaching, and that everybody is a teacher, that everybody is a learner. And at McKinsey, we actually teach skills to be a more effective teacher. And we also teach skills to be a more effective learner, because we've all had teachers in school that are good teachers, and we've had other teachers that aren't as great teachers, right? And so, we have this opportunity to sort of improve our teaching capabilities and improve our learning capabilities, right? And the thing that's really powerful about AI is a couple of things. So one is a learner. There's already tons of ways where you can leverage AI to help you fill in your learning gaps. I'm sure I at least 6 or 7 times a day am asking some AI tool, can you explain this to me? What does this mean? And you could even ask it to like give you something and then say, quiz me on this topic. Do I understand it? Right. So the ability for you as a learner already to use AI in the moment of work, and maybe you're even doing a work task, right? And as a part of that work task, you're asking it to help you out. We're seeing more and more LLMs also release kind of learning modes of their tools, right? And so again, right there already in the flow of work, what are you trying to do? You can ask questions to learn, and you can get it to test you on things. You can also ask it to like, help me with a development plan. Like, I'm trying to learn this skill. What should I be doing to help learn that skill, right? So there's a ton that's available right now for the learner. The piece we're still working on for the teacher, right, is again, can we use AI to sort of fill the gaps for the teacher and help to accelerate that teaching even more? Because I'm sure many of us have been, have a task, we're kind of stuck on the task. We go to ask our manager and they're like, well, sorry, I'm booked in meetings for the next 8 hours. I can't help you. Right? So maybe they're not available. Maybe they actually don't know the content at all, or maybe they're kind of a crappy teacher, right? So we can use AI then to fill those gaps. And the thing that's really powerful about the ability for AI to fill those gaps is it can fill it in the moment. Okay, so let me give you an example of something we're working on right now, just to sort of bring this to life.
Absolutely.
So for a lot of us, you might have an important client meeting that's coming up. What AI will allow you to do is, and there's a lot of different tools that do this right now, is pull together all the materials you might need for the meeting. So for an organization that has Salesforce, it might pull together all the history of the records of interactions. It might also go to an external source and pull together all the financial information. What was the last 6 things that were in the news about that company? Maybe like us, you actually have an internal repository of knowledge information about that industry. So it could pull all that information together, and it might give you a brief, right? It might say, hey, Moritz, you have this important conversation with Heather on Friday. Let me tell you everything you need to know about Heather, right? What we're doing is we're layering on top of that learning, right? So it's happening right there when Moritz needs it because he's got this call with Heather coming up. And what it says is basically, hey, Moritz, do you want help preparing for this meeting? And then it might work you through a set of kind of Socratic questions to help you kind of be better prepared, get you to the 2 or 3 big themes that you should be sharing. And then it says, hey, Moritz, do you want to role play that conversation with Heather? Do you want to practice it in advance?
Wow.
Right? It's happening right there in the moment, and it's creating a completely contextualized role play because, by the way, the role play agent has that same briefing of information, right? And so it knows, and so it can basically contextualize that role play just right there in the moment. So that's amazing. Right now, in the past, Moritz, you might have gone to somebody else more senior than you and said, hey, help me prepare for this conversation. Can you give me some tips and trips? Or can you help me, right? But now you've got the ability for AI to support you in that. So that's just an example of what we mean by learning in the flow of work at the moment you need it in a super personalized way.
Yeah, and suddenly this whole story about, learning and developing, becoming a performance support, feels so real because it's happening. And I think in one, podcast I heard, you were referring also how early you as the learning team got involved, in this kind of also business model, work on McKinsey, right? Because I think you said something like the key skill, that a consultancy brings is communication, right? Bringing, complex challenges in a very easy and smart way, to work on this in a way that maybe the company couldn't do alone. And therefore, I think then McKinsey also started to develop its own, kind of tool with Lily. It's an AI tool. You can tell much better than I do.
Mm-hmm.
And you said we were, not there to roll out this tool. No, we were there to really think of the next level communication skills, that the organization would need, right, to differentiate. And again, coming also back to this
so we are like involved with a product management team, right? So if you think about like how Heather personally is spending her time and how a lot of our teams are spending our time, I probably spend 50% of my week with technologists. Wow. Right? With our CIO, their teams, our product organizations, again, because we are designing the tool with the team. Right? And so, and we've got a number of different examples of this. Another great example is evaluations, right? And in the evaluation space, we're building an AI tool. I'll tell you about one piece of that tool. One of the things you always worry about in evaluations is bias, and you worry about bias, you worry about bias with a human and you worry about bias with AI, right? So we need to make sure that we have taught people what to look for in bias, right? Yeah. And so rather than building a learning program on bias that sits outside that you take, now inside the tool, it flags you, hey, this is a bias statement. Here's why it's a bias statement. Here's how you might think about it differently, right? So like right there in the moment, but we are designing that evaluation product with the product team that's building that evaluation product. And so what we've really done right now is to say, what are the most important skills that we want to upskill on, right? Like what are the highest priority skills to upskill on? One of them is communications, as you mentioned, Moritz. Another one is what we think about like opportunity creation, entrepreneurship, right? Another one, of course, is AI skills, right? And so if we were to prioritize those skills, how do we then embed that into the workflows where people are doing that work?
I love that. And just one thing, of course, which is a big discussion, of course, going on about is this observation that AI, of course, helps us, and the algorithms help us to take over the easy tasks, right? And maybe also the task which usually the career starters, would have been, building up also their skills. And just because I have the chance now talking to you about this whole apprenticeship model, how do we prevent raising a generation of leaders who lack this deep foundation just because there was the AI doing it for them? And how do you deal with this at McKinsey?
Yeah. So I guess a couple of things. So one is, as I described, we're trying to build our tools in a way they teach at the same time, right? So we're building the tools that they teach at the same time. So it's not just about productivity. It's also about skill building. Our CTO recently said she wants persistent learning throughout the ecosystem, right? So again, I'm not just focused on productivity. I'm also focused on development and how I think about that, right? The second bit is the human in the loop and the human judgment. And so we're spending a lot more time teaching that skill of human judgment. And for us at McKinsey, if all we can do is come back with an answer that's AI, like we're not anything important or special, right? And so we've always been an organization that sort of pushed the frontier, pushed the boundaries, pushed that, right? And so this notion of how do you take the AI solution and make it better, right? Which requires like systems thinking and contextual thinking, et cetera. So we really done a lot of work to understand what are those distinctive human skills that we think are going to be absolutely critical. And then how do we make sure, again, we embed them in the entire development ecosystem, which will include learning programs. It will include like the way of work and way we work rituals and other things that we do. So for example, we talk a lot about a ritual, which is always bring a +1. So what does that mean? That means that when I go to an important meeting, I bring somebody more junior along with me so they can watch and learn. And then at the end of the meeting, they ask a lot of questions. And the person that's leading that meeting, shares their mental model with that individual, right? So we embed those things in. And again, the thing that's amazing about AI as an opportunity is it also allows you to upskill in new ways, right? So what I described to you about that meeting planning, prepping, and the ability to role play, you could role play that 4 or 5 times, right? That's way more practice than you would have traditionally gotten in a traditional learning program.
I want to refer to this apprenticeship idea, and you just, I think you said it very straight on. It needs the senior guy to bring this +1, right? And I think this is a question I think many organizations struggle with. How do we get our managers to take more responsibility for developing these kind of future talents?
Yeah.
How do you make this at McKinsey? How do you keep them? How do you get this ownership?
We value it at McKinsey.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I guess a couple things. So one, we value it, right? So we value it in our review system. So one of the things we value is like how well are you apprenticing others? And by the way, we track it too. So we actually know like who are the people that say that you're apprenticing them, right? We actually, sponsoring and mentoring them. We actually know who those people are. And then we can say, you're a top 10%, sponsor, mentor, apprenticor, right? So we can actually see that in our organization. We value it, we measure it, right? So those are two things. The last thing, though, I would say is even without us valuing and measuring it, individuals understand fundamentally that by creating the capacity of the people underneath you allows you to do more, right, as a leader. Because if you build, and again, what apprenticeship is really about is about teaching somebody to operate with independence in a new skill area, right? So on my team, right, if I am able to teach people to operate with independence, I may not need to go to a set of meetings that I used to have to go to anymore because those people are, attending those meetings. And maybe it takes me a little more time to really apprentice them well for a period of time, but in the long run, 2-3 years later, wow, like I have set myself up for success. I've set them up for success. So this notion of taking the other thing is just taking a longer term view on the development of your teams and recognizing what taking that longer term view will do for your own growth and development and opportunities is huge. And so again, we definitely have a set of systems that apprentice it, but we also really have a culture where we understand, like by developing leaders underneath you, it actually helps you succeed.
When I'm listening to you, I have that image in my mind kind of forming that you at McKinsey are kind of building and exploring the future of knowledge work, right? I was immediately thinking about it when you said, well, it's really about finding this kind of next level of work productivity where, really truly human skills, combined with AI, combined with technology can achieve more,
Yep.
And I would love to learn or understand how are you doing this? Because for me, this is different than, training someone to use a tool, for example, right? It also means to really, make people aware that their standard of creativity, that their standard of critical thinking might not be enough, to work and, to work with AI and to achieve more, in this combination. So how do you make people explore, feel, realize, what it means to tap into this potential where human skills and AI can achieve more?
Yeah. Well, one of the big unlocks for me is that you don't teach them as two things. You teach them as one thing. So you teach problem solving with AI, right? And as you're teaching problem solving with AI, you're teaching it in a way to say, here's where you use AI, and here's where you use the human stuff that goes on top of it to make it even better. And here's how you think about it. And so I think one of the things that organizations need to think about is, can you move from teaching AI and teaching leadership skills to teaching a new way of leading, which is this augmented human way of leading, right? And then as you're teaching it, you're teaching the human skills that are really important, and you're teaching them AI in the context of augmentation of the human skills. So again, what we have done is we've actually reworked our leadership development curriculum. Mm-hmm. And we're embedding a new way of leading with AI into that curriculum versus I'm going to teach you how to use ChatGPT, and then I'm going to teach you how to problem solve.
Yeah. I would love to dig deeper here, because I think just today on Business Insider, you published some insights on your new approach to developing leaders. And I think one thing that really stuck with me was that you said, well, we really have to do this because we feel like our leaders are confronted with so much more, right? You said there in the past, there have been, let's say, 5 critical issues a day or a week, and now there are 10. And I guess one of the answers is, also by leveraging AI, I can, come ahead of this wave of issues here. But what does it mean? How do you do this? And how did you also get the buy-in, from your management to say, yes, I mean, we have to invest here in developing our leaders, and we have to expand our efforts, knowing that has been, I guess, already a lot of been done in the past already.
Yeah. So I would say, again, the world is getting more complex. The half-lives of skills are getting shorter and shorter. But I think particularly for our leaders, as you described, like the complexity in terms of how they're trying to lead is sort of a whole new level. And so what we've really been doing in our leadership curriculum is really thinking about this leading self and starting like leadership, what we also describe it. You can read some of the articles that Bob and others have written on inside out, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how do you start by leading from the inside first? Because again, it is that grounding in those like personal skills around resiliency, around self-awareness, that will around personal presence. Like, am I operating at my peak performance? Am I, sleeping enough? Am I eating enough? Am I, even doing some meditation and breathing exercises, right? Am I taking care of my
Navy SEALs, right?
Exactly. Am I taking care of my whole self first? And then I can take care of the much more complex issues. So again, this is what we've been doing a little more as we think about the importance of resiliency, the importance of learning agility in the future. How do we think about that? So we've been doing more and more of that as a part of our core leadership curriculum. And again, to support sort of what our expectations from our leaders that are, that are growing more and more every day.
And I think this is an amazing example because, listening to our conversation, you could say, perfect. The AI will teach basically anything to everyone in the company. So we just have to make sure we have the best models and we teach people how to use these models. But then again, if I listen to you about, teaching leaders also resilience, teaching, leaders, this self-leadership, does it need learning experience in terms of really bringing people together on the ground?
Yeah.
Is that also learning?
So we actually think that there will, we think that we will have kind of 2 major modes of learning, right? One will continue to be in-person learning through signature programs where absolutely we're thinking about leading yourself. We talk a lot about self-authorship from the beginning, and a lot of our sort of signature learning programs that happen at important transitional moments for people. We spend a lot of time of like, what's your next chapter? What's your S-curve? How are you going to lead? We will continue to have those, both for the purposes of teaching those skills, but also because they're so important for connection and community and culture. They create these kind of year-over-year memories that sort of like permeate through the organization that like build part of the fabric, right? We've run this learning program called Cambridge now for 20 years in a row at Cambridge College. And it's, you can pretty much talk to anybody at McKinsey and say, tell me about your Cambridge experience. And they will all share these amazing stories. So we will continue to have this in-person learning for these signature moments to bring people together, both for the learning, but more for, some of these other things. And then we believe we will have, what we've described as this sort of agentic learning support in the flow of work, meeting people where they are in a very personalized way that sort of supports their in the moment coaching needs. And those will be pretty much our 2 primary mechanisms for learning. But no, we do not believe that that in-person is going to go away.
I was just writing it down because it's, for me, I love it. You know, those signature learning programs, you know, that basically are happening in those transitional moments of careers, but maybe also of, you know, companies, transformations. And yeah, I think this is I think a really good definition. And do you think you can be even more courageous then, you know, to really go all in then also on experience versus, you know, having those, you know, big halls, you know, with, you know, PowerPoint karaoke, you know, people will be presenting and this all day long. I mean, do you feel like in your team, also yourself?
Yes, we absolutely, I mean, we already do that, right? We do.
Say, okay, so let's go all into the experience now that we have everyone here.
Well, and it's not just about the experience, it's also about the skill building itself. But like, yes, so most of our learning programs, you will see we have they're mostly done in person in small groups, right? Somewhere between, you know, 5 and 8 people with a faculty that spends a lot of time with that small group of people, that they build relationships and safety and comfort in having those conversations. So I would say that's one thing. The other thing we're really incorporating into these in-person learning programs, because even these in-person learning programs, there's an opportunity for more deliberate practice. And being able to leverage tools like AI tools, even in those programs, right? So in the past, you might have had a scenario where you have a team of 5 people and each person over the course of one program gets to role play something once, right? They role play it, they get feedback on it. But let's say they role played it, they got feedback on it. They don't get another chance to practice that feedback just because of the time you have for the program, right? But with AI, we can start to embed deliberate practice into the program where it might be like, okay, well, these people are prepping for this. You go do some deliberate practice with AI. Then you're even more prepared for that in-person role play and to get the feedback, right? And oh, by the way, I'm also able to capture skills data now. So in my learning programs, I am able to capture skills data through practice exercises where in our onboarding program, for example, we're able to see an 8% improvement in problem solving skills. And we think about a 20% improvement in communication skills over the course of that in-person program. So now if somebody says to me, Heather, is that program worth the money? I used to be able to say, people really like it. They get a lot out of it. They said they learned something. Right? Now I can say, well, they're improving their problem solving skills by 10% and they're improving their communication skills by 20%. Feels like a pretty good ROI to me.
And how do you get that data? Is this reviews, you know, from the trainers, or is it peer reviews?
No, we're using AI. We're using these AI coaches, right? Like, you know, because again, you can do an exercise. Let's say you can build an issue tree, which is one of our core approaches to problem solving. You can turn in the issue, like before you would just write the issue tree. Now you can turn the issue tree into AI. You build a rubric to grade it. It grades the issue tree, tells you how you're doing on it, right? That's your first issue tree. Maybe you do that on day 1. On day 4, you're building another issue tree, and that day 4 issue tree, you also turn into AI. AI grades it, and I can see the difference.
Yeah. Is this already then connected to the overall McKinsey skill intelligence? I mean, because I know there's a big buzz going on skill-driven organizations, and I know that, I think at least what I read is that you are also a supporter of this idea and using skills as this kind of platform or the operating kind of system, you know, to get talent flows, you know, accelerating. And how is this all kind of connected? So again, we're very thoughtful, right? Because what I just described to you, that's development. That's about your own individual development over the course of a program. So we are looking at that data in a much more aggregate way, right? We're not assigning it to an individual and putting it in any systems, right? We have other skills data where we are more explicit about that we're using it. So for example, we have an expertise credentialing program where we credential your expertise in different areas, including, by the way, a whole bunch of AI credentials. Those credentials, they flow into our staffing system. And so our staffing system, as you're looking for types of projects that you want to do, it matches that expertise. But that's, again, intentional because we're saying, you get this, it's a, you know, credential, it's visible to everyone that you have it. We can then pull it into staffing systems. We can also use it for strategic talent planning. But we are not, and I don't know that we ever will, take this developmental data that you're using in a learning program to inform that individual about how they personally can get better
and also to sort of give us some aggregate information about how we're doing on things to an individual that would then go into a skills profile. That doesn't feel like what we would do. So we're really thinking about, and I think one of the things that we've really thought about with our skills approach is a very use case specific approach, right? So we think about what is the skills approach for recruiting? What do we need it for staffing? What do we need it for talent planning? How do we need to use it for learning and development? And it may take, again, a different format based on what we're using it for.
So, but are these all kind of individual systems, or is this all kind of coming together in one kind of skills intelligence, in one, let's say, opportunity marketplace where people are going to see, the right projects?
The way we think about it is we have like a data layer, which is the skills data, right? Yeah. And some systems are putting skills data in, and some systems are pulling skills data out. So for example, our engagement performance reviews that we use, right? They measure skills. There are formal assessment that happens at the end of every project. That's putting skills in. Those skills that get put in are also then pulled out, and the information on those skills is pulled out for our performance reviews, where an AI is actually synthesizing a lot of that skills intelligence information from those regular project-based feedback. Or like I said, we have a credentialing platform that's putting skills in around expertise. Our staffing engine is pulling skills out, right? So we're not like isolating them in any one platform. It's more of creating the right data architecture, which, by the way, with this new agentic ways of working, is getting easier and easier to do. Right? Because in the past, you used to have like one taxonomy, and every system had a match, and how you called communication skills in one place, you had to show it up in another. And now with ontologies and knowledge graphs and everything else, it's not as hard anymore to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, what you just said is, this gives learning a completely different, standard to measure and also show and prove the impact, right, of its work. So this whole never-ending discussion on what's the return, on invest on learning, I guess you're beyond that. At least I would assume.
Yeah, and that's one of the other things we talk about is you transforming your learning organization into really a performance monitoring organization, right? Because you're monitoring the performance and the capabilities overall, and then you're turning dials up and down, which is kind of your agentic learning agents, and maybe you're making some adjustments into your in-person learning programs, but you have the information around really where is everybody on their skills journey.
Yeah. Wow. That's really cool. I mean, it feels super beyond, as I said already at the beginning. You're kind of you're the living proof, I would say, of this future of knowledge work. I mean, just zooming out a little bit, Heather, I think you meet also a lot of talent, learning leaders from other organizations. And I know you have also this consulting muscle well trained. When you listen to the market, when you listen where most of those L&D leaders are, what would you say are maybe the three things that you just looking maybe last 6 months that you have been advising the most?
Yeah. So one of the things we haven't actually gotten to is data. Right? Because a lot of this is all about the quality of the data and your ability to capture data. So like one conversation that we have a lot is about your data, right? So that's a big conversation we have. A second conversation we have oftentimes is about this apprenticeship and the culture of apprenticeship, and how in a lot of organizations there's a culture which is I'm only learning if I'm in a learning program.
Yes.
Right? And they're not learning on the job, and what is required to shift an organization to move kind of into this culture of apprenticeship, right? Let alone then saying, okay, now I'm going to have AI help support me, right? And I would say then the third conversation that I have with folks is where we sort of started around this development ecosystem, in this notion of how do you think about getting your learning and development organization to shift from thinking I'm building training to I'm supporting this development ecosystem. So I would say those are like three topics that we talk a lot about.
And what would you say, just from your observation, is what is standing in the way of most of those talent and learning leaders? What would you say are the patterns here?
What is standing in the way? So I think, I would say maybe a couple things are standing in the way. One is they've just never thought of themselves in that, right? So it's a bit of a mindset shift that people need to make in terms of, kind of how do I need to position myself in the organization, what role I need to play. So I think that's one. The second I would say is just the business uncertainty that is right now, right? Like nobody can really answer how is work changing. Therefore, what are the skills I need to upskill on? Like the learning tech, I don't know if you've had any podcasts on like the learning tech space, right? The learning tech ecosystem and like how that's all going to play out. Like that's very uncertain. And so there's a lot of uncertainty. So I would say that's number two. And then number three, I think, is this sort of thinking, wow, I've got to solve this as one big answer versus can I solve it as like individual use cases, right? Can I take, like I described this sort of meeting preparation, can I just take that and make some progress so I can, move forward? And I think there's maybe a fourth thing, which is you hear a lot in the world of AI. How do you move from experimentation to scale? Right. So I might have some like successful experiments going in a couple of places in my organization, and like getting it from there to actual scale is really hard. And then the last one I think is, this is now I'm at 5, is a lot of what we need to do in learning is very dependent on technology and IT organizations, right? And depending on the maturity of your IT organization, how far you can actually go into this vision that we've been talking about is tough. So I think that's another thing that's kind of holding some folks back.
I dare to add a 6th one, knowing that I would destroy every McKinsey kind of slide logic here. Exactly. And I'm even now scared that it's not Misi, but at least I feel many kind of L&D leaders are also not really used to basically say no and also basically get rid of legacy, right? Legacy systems, legacy demands from the organization. So they're so busy kind of in, just moving this old legacy system, down the lane that they do not really find the time to really, get hands on those, I think, much bigger impact topics that we touched in the last 40 minutes.
No, I think that's probably very true, right? It's very hard to shut things down. Right. I was in a meeting with L&D leaders 2 days ago, and that was a huge portion of the conversation. It was like, what are you shutting down the old stuff? And like, whether it's like certain content vendors or certain, programs that you've been running forever or, whatever else. It's hard to move away from those. And it's hard to shift. It's hard to shift your organization.
Where did you find the courage? To shut off things? Was there ever a moment where you felt like, this is bold now?
I think, again, from my consulting background and everything else, so it's sort of always been a bit of an innovator and not afraid to sort of shut things down or say no, et cetera. We've been, consolidating our tech vendor ecosystem for like the last 2 years. And it's like, do we not have the demand for this? Okay, then we're not doing it anymore. So we've actually been pretty good about that. And again, it's you can talk to, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to make bold decisions sometimes. So yeah.
And I guess, that's needed. Time is flying, Heather, and at least for me, these have been, I don't know, the fastest 45 minutes of this year for sure. But I want to end with one last question, because what I really like and appreciate whenever I hear you speak or read texts, you always highlight this idea of chief learning officers must lead, by example. So they must lead also by learning, and by the end of the day, being this intentional learner, yourself. And the last question I wanted to ask you is about, what did you learn in the last, let's say, 12 months about the future of learning and development that really inspires you and gives you the courage to change learning and development, just as you've proven in the last 40 minutes?
Yeah. So, I am spending, I read so many technology newsletters, and, I sit down with our chief architects and ask them a bunch of questions. And I think what I've learned over the last 12 months is that this agentic always on coaching experience, it actually works. Like, it's real. We can do it. And we actually know what the new architecture needs to be to get us there. Right. And so, we don't have time today, and I'm not going to do it justice to sort of describe what that looks like, but like, it is real, it's possible. And that's what I've really learned. Like, 12 months ago, we had this idea. We had this idea of agentic learning in the flow of work that sort of met people's demands, et cetera. And now I can say, from what I've learned and seen, it's real. Now, there's stuff you got to learn, like you got to learn how to build the coaches, and you have to learn how to build the rubrics, right? And you have to understand how to build an AI native data infrastructure. And that's why I say data is really important. But those things are all now doable in a way that they've never been in the past. And so that's what I think, that's what gets me really excited, is that this is all possible. And I guess one more thing that gets me excited is that the way of an AI now is, in the past, you had to go build a go get a SaaS platform, or build something totally different, and then bring it all into the organization, right? And it was a major transformation. The way we're talking about this is building puddles, right? And we were just talking about this with a bunch of CLOs this week. You're building puddles. So you're building like this meeting agent puddle, building off the set of data that I happen to have to support this. And then I can build another puddle. I can build this communications puddle, like to get you better on PowerPoint slides. And I can build all these puddles. And because of the way you can architect sort of this AI native data infrastructure, you can then connect the puddles. So you don't have to like jump into this whole big thing all at once. You can actually build puddles, prove your value along the way, because you're not sort of saying, hey, I need $10 million to build out this big thing. But the puddles can then connect. And then you create this new data mesh and this whole lake and all this stuff. And then you can do it sort of at scale, company-wide. So that's the other thing I've learned. I've learned that you can do it through building puddles.
Yeah, and just maybe one last question. How much kind of specific new tools, tech do you need for that? And how much of that can you just build in the large language models that most companies have at hand?
So you need data. You need what we're calling like this data mesh. You need data mesh and a semantic layer. So there's some things you actually need. You can do all the piloting you want in sort of a regular old LLM, but there is some like data stuff that you need to get right, like even within these puddles. Yeah. But again, they can be pretty small puddles. Yeah.
It's Friday evening in Berlin. And it doesn't feel like one. I'm now really super excited, and it feels like Monday morning, and like I want to change the world now. Heather, thank you so much for making the time. This was really inspiring, and I think for me, and I think for many other people who will listen to this episode, a glimpse into the future. And thank you for doing all this kind of pioneering work, for exploring and even taking the time to share your learnings about it. That's really exceptional. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Heather.
You. Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.